I assumed tonight was just another mandatory dinner designed to remind me of my place. That changed the second my husband stood up, raised his glass, and calmly announced he was leaving me for my own sister. The entire table went silent, waiting for my tears. They had no idea I had already prepared the dessert weeks ago, and it was certainly not something they would enjoy swallowing. My name is Harper Wells, and I turned 32 years old exactly 3 weeks ago. Walking into the sprawling Caldwell estate in Lakeshore Crest always felt like stepping onto a movie set where everyone knew their lines except for me. But tonight, the atmosphere was different. It was heavy. It was thick with anticipation. The way the staff averted their eyes as I handed over my coat told me everything I needed to know. This scene had been staged, and I was the unsuspecting prop about to be discarded. I took my seat at the long mahogany table. The cast was all present. My husband, Ethan Caldwell, sat at the head, looking impeccably groomed in a suit that cost more than my father made in a year. To his right sat his mother, Patricia, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning the table for imperfections. His father, Dean, was swirling a glass of red wine, looking bored. And then there was my sister. Tessa Wells sat directly across from me. She was wearing a scarlet dress that was far too bold for a family dinner, the fabric hugging her frame in a way that demanded attention. Her smile was plastered on, fixed and bright, like she had been practicing it in the mirror for hours. Dinner had barely begun when Patricia fired the opening shot. She sliced into her steak with surgical precision. "You know," Patricia said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I was just telling Ethan earlier today how vital it is for a family to maintain its standards. We need to be pure. Everyone needs to be in their proper place." It is such a tragedy when people try to force themselves where they simply do not belong. Don't you agree, Harper? I placed my napkin in my lap, smoothing out the fabric. I think belonging is a matter of perspective. Patricia, I replied calmly. Patricia scoffed, but before she could retort, Ethan stood up. He picked up his spoon and tapped it against his crystal wine glass. The sound cut through the room sharp and clear. He did not look nervous. He looked like he was presiding over a board meeting. "I have an announcement to make," Ethan said. His voice was steady. It was devoid of any warmth. "I have done a lot of thinking lately. About my future. About happiness. And I have decided that I can no longer continue in this marriage. I am leaving you, Harper." The room went deathly silent, but Ethan was not finished. He turned his gaze toward my sister. "I want to live my truth," he continued, his voice taking on a rehearsed cadence. "And I have realized that my truth lies with the only person who has ever truly understood me. I am going to be with Tessa." A collective gasp went around the table, though it sounded entirely manufactured. Dean murmured something indistinct. Tessa covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes widening in a performance of shock that would not have convinced a child. "Ethan, oh my God, I didn't think you would," Tessa stammered, her voice trembling theatrically. But I was not looking at her face. I was looking under the table. The tablecloth had shifted slightly, and I saw her hand resting firmly on Ethan's thigh. She squeezed his leg. It was a gesture of victory, not surprise. My eyes drifted past them to the sideboard. A smartphone was propped up against a large vase of white hydrangeas. The screen was facing us. I caught the reflection of a tiny red light in the polished silver of my butter knife. They were recording this. No, they were live streaming it. They wanted the world to watch me crumble. Patricia leaned forward, abandoning all pretense of civility. "Finally," she hissed. "Now we can stop this charade. You were always just a leech, Harper, clinging to our name. And do not think you can make a scene to extort money from us. The infidelity clause in the prenuptial agreement goes both ways, but the reputation clause is specific. If you cause a scandal, If you are the one who looks unstable, you walk away with $0. You get nothing. I sat there. I did not scream. I did not throw my wine in Ethan's face. I did not lunge across the table to strangle my sister. The silence stretched out, agonizing and long. I reached for my water glass. My hand was steady. I took a slow sip, letting the cool liquid wash away the dry taste of betrayal. I set the glass down without making a sound. I looked at Ethan. I did not see the man I had married. I saw a liability. I saw a breached contract. Is that all I asked quietly? Ethan blinked, clearly unsettled by my lack of hysteria. Harper, look, I know this is hard. I looked down at my plate. In my mind, I was not a heartbroken wife. I was a strategist watching the enemy walk into a trap. They wanted me to cry. They wanted a viral moment of the crazy, scorned wife to justify their betrayal to the public. They wanted to destroy me tonight, but they did not know the truth. By opening their mouths, by broadcasting their cruelty, they had just signed their own confessions. I had prepared the dessert weeks ago, and they had just volunteered to eat the poison. I did not come from a world where dinner jackets were mandatory or where silence was a weapon used across a dining table. I grew up on the outskirts of a steel town in Pennsylvania, raised by a single mother who taught me that the only safety net in this life was the one you wove yourself. I clawed my way into college on scholarships and worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on. The Caldwells looked at my background and saw a lack of pedigree, but they failed to see the grit. They assumed I was weak because I was polite, never realizing that I had survived things that would have shattered their fragile, crystal egos. I met Ethan 5 years ago at Ravenwood Compliance Group. I was a senior risk management analyst, and he was the charming heir sent to oversee a merger he barely understood. He did not act like a king then. He played the part of the humble student. He would sit on the edge of my desk, holding a cup of lukewarm coffee, and look at me with eyes that seemed to see right through the corporate noise. "You are the only person here who actually makes sense," he had told me once, his voice soft and seemingly sincere. "I need someone like you to keep me grounded." I fell for the role he played. I thought I had found a partner, a prince who valued my mind. I was wrong. The moment the wedding band slid onto my finger, the molding process began. It was subtle at first. Ethan would suggest I change my dress because the color was too aggressive for the country club. Then it was my laugh. He told me to keep it down because it sounded unrefined. Slowly, systematically, I was sanded down from a woman with edges and ambition into a smooth, silent accessory designed to look good on his arm at galas. Patricia was the architect of this erasure. Every Sunday dinner was an interrogation disguised as conversation. She would swirl her glass of Pinot Noir, her eyes locking onto mine like a hawk spotting a field mouse. "Remind me again." "Harper," she would say, feigning forgetfulness. "Where exactly did your great-grandfather study? Was it Yale or—" "Oh, forgive me, I forgot he was a laborer." I would look at Ethan, waiting for him to defend me, to defend us. But he would just stare at his plate, cutting his meat into tiny, perfect squares. Later, in the safety of our bedroom, he would offer the same tired excuse. "She is just old-fashioned." "Harper," he would whisper, turning his back to me. "Don't make a big deal out of it. Things will be different when I take over the company." But things never became different. They only became worse. And the person who should have been my ally was the one currently holding Ethan's hand under the table. Tessa, my little sister. The one I had bailed out of debt 3 times. The one whose rent I paid when she was finding herself for 5 years straight. Tessa, who looked at my life and saw only the jewelry, never the suffocation. "You are just lucky, Harper," she used to tell me, her voice thick with envy. "You caught a rich husband and you act like it is hard work. You have no idea what the real world is like. The real shift happened 2 years ago. It was the winter I lost the baby. It was a quiet tragedy, a medical complication that left me hollowed out. I needed my husband. Instead, Ethan recoiled. He stopped touching me. He started working late, claiming he had deal closings that ran until 3 in the morning. "I have to work," he would say when I asked him to stay home. "This merger is for our future. Harper, stop being so needy." That was when Patricia made her move. A month after the miscarriage, she sat me down in the solarium. "I think it is time you resigned from Ravenwood," she said, not as a suggestion, but as a command. "It does not look right for Ethan's wife to be working a 9-to-5 job. You need to focus on your health and repairing the family image." She wanted to take away the one thing that belonged to me, my career, my competence, and Ethan let her. He agreed. He told me it was for the best. That was the moment the blinders finally fell off. I realized that in the Caldwell house, affection was just a transaction. I had failed to produce an heir, and I had failed to blend in seamlessly. To them, I was not a grieving mother or a loving wife. I was a bad investment, and they were preparing to cut their losses. The first cracks in the porcelain facade of my marriage did not appear with a bang, but with a schedule. I started noticing a pattern that was too precise to be accidental. Every single time I had an appointment with my therapist or a follow-up with my doctor regarding the miscarriage, Ethan had a closed-door strategy meeting. It happened like clockwork. If my appointment was at 2 in the afternoon, his phone would go dark at 1:45. It felt less like a conflict of schedules and more like a deliberate orchestration, as if someone were managing my time to ensure I was occupied while they were free. Then came the phone. I found it vibrating under the passenger seat of his sedan one Tuesday evening. It was a cheap, prepaid model, nothing like the sleek device he used for work. When I confronted him in the kitchen, holding the plastic device like a contaminated object, he did not even flinch. He just laughed, shaking his head as he poured himself a glass of scotch. "Harper, you are being ridiculous," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "That is a secure line for the merged asset deal. High-level security. I can't believe you would snoop through my car like a paranoid housewife." He made me feel small. He made me feel crazy. And while I was doubting my own sanity, my sister moved in for the kill. Tessa leased an apartment just 3 blocks away from the Lakeshore Crest gates. She claimed she wanted to be closer to support me during my recovery. But the support felt more like an invasion. Patricia was unusually thrilled, welcoming Tessa with a warmth she had never shown me in 4 years. I came home one afternoon to find Tessa standing in my kitchen, wearing one of my silk robes. She was drinking coffee out of my favorite mug, the one I bought in Paris, and chatting with Patricia. "Oh, hey, Harper," Tessa said, not moving to change or apologize. She turned back to my mother-in-law. "Anyway, Mom, you were saying about the gala, Mom." The word hung in the air like a slap. Tessa called her Mom. I was the wife, and I was still Harper. But my sister had effortlessly slipped into the role of the beloved daughter. Ethan began to dismantle my credibility in public. At a dinner party with the board of directors, I mentioned a recent article I had read about market volatility. Ethan placed a hand on my shoulder, squeezing just a little too hard. "Honey," he said, flashing a pitying smile at his colleagues, "you are confusing that blog post you read with actual news again. You have been so sensitive lately. Maybe the wine is not helping." The table chuckled. I sat there, humiliated, my valid point reduced to the ramblings of an unstable woman. He was rewriting the narrative of who I was, painting me as erratic and fragile so that when he finally discarded me, everyone would think he was doing me a favor. The breaking point was a velvet box I found hidden in the glove compartment of his car. Inside was a delicate diamond bracelet with a small charm shaped like the letter T. When I asked him about it, his lie was smooth and practiced. "It is a closing gift for the Thompson account," he said, not looking up from his laptop. "T for Thompson. Standard corporate gifting. Harper, stop looking for ghosts. 3 days later, we attended the annual charity gala for the Caldwell Foundation. I wore black, trying to fade into the background. Tessa arrived in shimmering gold, walking arm in arm with Patricia. And there it was, glinting under the ballroom chandeliers, wrapped around my sister's wrist, was the diamond bracelet with the letter T. Tessa caught me looking. She did not hide it. Instead, she raised her champagne flute, rotating her wrist slowly so the diamonds caught the light, sending a silent, mocking signal directly to me. I felt a cold hand on my elbow. It was Patricia. She leaned in close, her perfume overpowering the scent of the fresh lilies in the room. "You look tired, dear," she whispered, her voice low and menacing. "You know, smart women know to leave the table before being asked to leave. It saves everyone the embarrassment of dragging them out." That was the moment the tears stopped threatening to fall. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I looked at Patricia, then at Ethan laughing with Tessa across the room. They thought they had broken me. They thought I was confused and scared. I stopped asking questions that night. I stopped begging for attention. Instead, I went home and opened a fresh notebook. I started writing down dates. I logged the times Ethan left the house. I tracked the mileage on his car. I saved the receipts he thought he had thrown away. I was no longer the victim waiting for the blow to land. I was the investigator building a case, and I would not stop until I had enough evidence to bury them all. I bought the burner phone at a rundown convenience store 3 towns over, paying in cash to ensure there was no digital paper trail. It was a cheap plastic device, but it felt heavier in my pocket than the platinum credit cards Ethan had given me. I set up a new encrypted email address and sent my first message to Miranda Cross. She was a divorce attorney known for being a shark in the courtroom, operating completely outside the Caldwell's social sphere. I did not need a friend. I needed a mercenary who didn't care about my husband's last name. While I built my external defenses, the walls inside the house began to close in. My access to our joint bank account started to malfunction. First, the daily withdrawal limit was lowered. Then, my card was declined at the grocery store. When I confronted Ethan about it that evening, he didn't even look up from his tablet. "You have been manic lately, Harper," he said, his voice smooth and dismissively calm. "I put a temporary limit on the spending for your own good. You need to rest, not shop, just calm down. You are imagining problems that do not exist." He was gaslighting me, trying to paint me as fiscally irresponsible to build a narrative of instability. He forgot that before I was his trophy wife, I was a risk management analyst. I waited until he was asleep. Then I accessed the home office server. I bypassed the basic firewalls and started digging into the Caldwell Foundation's ledgers. On the surface, it looked pristine, but I knew where to look for the rot. I found a series of recurring payments going to a generic consulting firm called Apex Solutions. The amounts were always just under $10,000 to avoid triggering automatic federal reporting. I did not trust the cloud. If they found out I knew, they could wipe the servers remotely. I printed everything. Bank statements, donor contracts, and the list of vendors. I hid the physical stack of papers inside a waterproof box tucked into the lining of my winter coats in the guest closet. 2 days later, I met a former accounts manager from Caldwell Home Systems at a diner 30 miles away. He was nervous, constantly checking the door as he spoke. "They run double books," he whispered, staring into his black coffee. "One set for the IRS and one for the real money." I left because I didn't want to go to jail for Dean Caldwell. "If you have the invoices—" "You can prove it." I had the numbers, but I needed the intent. I needed them to admit their malice. The next time Tessa came over for tea with Patricia, I left my handbag on the console table in the hallway. My phone was inside, recording. I went to the kitchen to fetch sugar and lingered there for 5 minutes. When I played the recording back later in the safety of my car, Patricia's voice was crystal clear. "We just need to wait for the gala season to end," she said. "Then we kick her out. She is becoming inconvenient. We cannot have her moping around when Ethan announces the expansion. I can't wait. Tessa giggled, a sound that made my stomach turn. I am tired of hiding in my own house. I want to be the one standing next to him. I took everything to Miranda Cross. She combed through the prenuptial agreement I had signed blindly years ago. Her finger stopped at a paragraph on page 42. "Look at this," Miranda said, her eyes sharp. "The infidelity clause protects them." Yes, but there is a defamation addendum. It says that if either party publicly humiliates the other or causes proven mental anguish to force a settlement, the asset caps are voided. They wrote this to stop you from selling stories to the tabloids, but the wording is vague. It works both ways. A plan formed in my mind. If they wanted to destroy me, I had to let them try. I had to let them do it publicly, loudly, and without mercy. "We file for divorce now," Miranda advised, leaning back in her chair. "We file. We get the docket number to secure your timeline, but we don't serve them yet. We wait until they feel safe. We wait until they think they are in control." I looked at the calendar on her desk. The family dinner was coming up. It was the perfect stage. I named the operation in my head The Last Dinner. I was not going there to beg for my marriage. I was going there to let them talk themselves into a grave. Miranda Cross filed the paperwork at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. It was a precise, three-pronged legal strike designed to cripple them before they even knew they were in a fight. We filed the petition for divorce, an emergency motion for an anti-defamation order, and a thick dossier documenting financial manipulation within the marriage. But the real kill switch was the litigation hold letter she sent via courier to the Caldwell estate. It was a formal notice that legally froze them in place. If they deleted a single email, scrubbed 1 second of security footage, or shredded a single receipt after signing for that letter, they would be facing criminal charges for spoliation of evidence. They were now living in a glass house where they could not even clean the windows without risking jail time. Meanwhile, I quietly initiated a different kind of destruction. I submitted a formal whistleblower complaint regarding the irregularities in the Caldwell Foundation. I did not send it to the local police who played golf with Dean Caldwell. I sent the double ledgers and the fabricated invoices directly to federal oversight agents who had the power to freeze assets faster than Ethan could transfer them. The report from my private investigator arrived regarding my sister, and it painted a picture of desperation rather than romance. Tessa was not just a woman in love. She was a woman drowning in debt. She owed nearly $80,000 to various credit card companies and another $50,000 in high-interest personal loans. She wasn't looking for a soulmate in my husband. She was looking for a financial lifeboat, and she didn't care if she had to drown me to climb aboard. But the debt was not the smoking gun. The investigator had dug deeper into her chaotic past and found a document from a courthouse in Nevada. Tessa was still legally married to a mechanic she had met in Las Vegas 4 years ago. She had never filed the paperwork to dissolve it. If she married Ethan, she would be committing bigamy. She was dragging the pristine Caldwell reputation into a felony that no amount of public relations spin could fix. The most painful revelation, however, concerned Ethan. I had wanted to believe he was just a weak man seduced by my sister, but the papers proved he was the architect of my misery. He wasn't being manipulated. He was the one pulling the strings. He had systematically staged every moment of my instability to build a case for my incapacitation. His goal was to invoke a specific clause in our prenup that gave him full control of our joint assets if I was deemed mentally unfit. I looked at the transaction logs I had recovered. Ethan had already transferred ownership of 2 shell companies into a new holding trust. The beneficiary line was currently blank, but the intent was obvious. He planned to slot Tessa's name in the moment I was out of the picture, effectively hiding millions of dollars of marital assets in her name. I sat in Miranda's office, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on my chest. Miranda looked at the timeline of the upcoming dinner and the evidence of their planned live stream. "They are going to try to break you publicly," Miranda said, her voice sharp and focused. They want a show. They need you to look crazy to sell their narrative. But here is the thing. Harper, if they go public with these lies to force a settlement, they void their own legal protections. They are handing us the knife. I looked at the file on the desk. I had enough to stop them right now. I could call Ethan and scream the truth. I could warn them. But mercy was a luxury they had not afforded me. Let them do it, I said, my voice steady. Let them set up the cameras. Let them speak, because once they say it out loud, they can never take it back. I decided right then that I would walk into that dinner and play my part. I would let them think they were winning until the very last second. I would let them broadcast their cruelty to the world, ensuring that when the hammer finally fell, there would be thousands of witnesses to their destruction. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, couched in the fake warmth that Patricia had perfected over decades. She claimed she wanted a reconciliation dinner to clear the air before the holiday season began. It was a transparent trap, but I replied within 10 minutes to accept. I needed access to the house one last time, and they needed a victim to sacrifice. We were both walking toward the same collision, but only one of us was wearing a seatbelt. I spent an hour staring at my closet, calculating every inch of my appearance. If I wore red, they would call me aggressive. If I wore black, they would say I was melodramatic. I chose a pale, unstructured linen dress that hung loosely on my frame and skipped the mascara. I needed to look tired. I needed to look like a woman who had already given up. If they thought I had any fight left in me, they might hesitate, and I needed them to be completely confident. Before I left, I received a text from an old college friend who worked in high-end home security. I had asked him to remotely ping the network at the Caldwell estate, which I still had access to on my tablet. His message was brief and chilling. He confirmed that a new high-definition device had been added to the network that morning, and its IP address was streaming data to a public broadcasting platform. They had not just set a camera, they had set a stage. The lens was positioned directly above the sideboard, angled perfectly to capture the dining table. I parked my car at the edge of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, I saw a nondescript gray sedan idling down the street. That was the process server Miranda Cross had hired. He was not just a delivery man, he was an officer of the court. He was waiting for my text signal to walk up to the front door and serve the papers that would shatter their little reality show. I walked into the house with my phone already recording in my pocket. I had secured a specific court order allowing me to record conversations in the marital home to document potential domestic abuse and coercion. This was not just a secret recording, it was admissible evidence. The dining room was set for a funeral, or perhaps a coronation. The silverware gleamed under the lights, and the air smelled of expensive roasting meat and heavy perfume. I took my seat, keeping my hands folded in my lap. I looked small. I looked defeatable. I waited until the wine had been poured before I cast the first stone. I kept my voice low and trembling, exactly how they wanted it to sound. My sister. She seems to be here a lot lately. Doesn't she? I asked, looking down at my soup. Patricia smiled, a sharp expression that did not reach her eyes. She set her glass down with a definitive clink. We are family. Harper, Patricia said, her voice projecting slightly as if she were speaking to an audience. And family supports one another, unlike some people who only take. You would do well to remember the silence clause in your contract. Family honor is paramount. If you damage this family's reputation, you walk away with nothing. We have been very generous to tolerate your moods for this long. I committed every word to memory. She had just threatened me with financial ruin to enforce silence, and she had done it while I was legally recording. Across the table, Tessa was fidgeting. She kept glancing at the phone propped against the vase. She took a deep, shaky breath, like an actress preparing for her big monologue. Then, she reached out and placed her hand over Ethan's hand, tapping his knuckles twice. It was the signal. I felt a cold calm wash over me. My heart was not racing. My hands were not shaking. I watched Ethan clear his throat and adjust his tie. He was about to destroy his marriage for an audience, thinking he was the director of this scene. Go ahead, I thought, staring at the red reflection in the silverware. Say it. Say every word you rehearsed, because tonight, your script is my evidence. Ethan's voice did not waver. He spoke with the charitable tone of a benevolent king tossing crumbs to a peasant, clearly performing for the invisible audience he knew was watching. I am going to be generous. Harper, he said, leaning back in his chair, you will receive a one-time payment of $50,000 to help you start over. It is more than fair considering everything. He gestured vaguely at me, as if my very existence was a flaw he had graciously tolerated for years. Before I could respond, Patricia leaned in, her eyes gleaming with malice. She looked directly past me, focusing her gaze on the hidden camera lens nestled against the vase. It is for the best, dear, she said, her voice dripping with faux concern that made my skin crawl. You have been so unstable lately. We all think you need professional help. Serious therapy. Honestly, your clinging has become embarrassing for the family. You are suffocating him. Tessa chimed in right on cue. She reached across the table, her hand hovering near mine, but never actually touching it. A perfect pantomime of sisterly regret. I am sorry it has to be this way. Harper, she said, pouting slightly, but you know how you are. You always want to win. You treat people like possessions. Ethan needs to breathe, and I just want him to be happy. The table fell silent, waiting for my explosion. They wanted the scream. They wanted the tears. They wanted the viral clip. Instead, I carefully placed my silver spoon back into the empty bowl. The metal made a soft, deliberate sound that echoed like a gavel striking a block. I looked up, locking eyes with my husband. So, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Just to be clear for everyone listening, do you admit that you and my sister began this relationship while you were still fully married to me? That this was not a sudden decision, but a calculated affair? Ethan scoffed, emboldened by the wine and the adrenaline of his performance. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted to prove that his love for Tessa was real and superior to whatever we had. Of course, Ethan sneered, his ego overriding his caution. We have been together for 6 months. I found peace with her while you were busy being... you... The room seemed to freeze. He had just admitted to adultery on a broadcast he had set up. I turned my head slowly and looked directly at the phone propped against the vase. Good, I said to the lens. I needed exactly that sentence. Patricia's smirk faltered. What are you talking about? At that exact second, the doorbell rang. It was not a polite chime. It was a firm, authoritative press. The maid hurried to answer it, and a moment later, a man in a gray suit walked into the dining room. He didn't look at the decor. He walked straight to Ethan and dropped a thick manila envelope onto his plate, right on top of his untouched steak. Ethan Caldwell, the man asked. You have been served. Ethan ripped the envelope open, his face drained of color as he read the bold headers. This is a divorce filing, he stammered, his hands shaking. And a restraining order, an asset freeze. The date on this is 3 days ago. He looked up at me, his arrogance replaced by pure, unadulterated confusion. You did this before tonight, he whispered. I picked up my wine glass, swirling the red liquid. I did it before you had the chance to paint me as the villain. I replied coldly. I did it before you could cut off my access to the accounts. And I did it before you admitted to 6 months of infidelity on a live stream that just voided your prenup protections. You bitch! Patricia shrieked, standing up so fast her chair fell over. Turn that camera off! Leave it on! I commanded, my voice cutting through her screeching. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a thin blue folder. I tossed it onto the center of the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right in front of Tessa. "And this," I said, pointing to the file. "This is the real reason you wanted to live stream my humiliation tonight. You needed a distraction from what is in there." By 8 in the morning, the clip of Ethan declaring his love for my sister while my mother-in-law sneered at the camera was trending on every major social media platform. The internet had titled it "The Lakeshore Betrayal," and the comments were a mix of horror and fascination. But the Caldwell machine did not sleep. By 9 o'clock, their crisis management team had launched a counteroffensive. Patricia released a glossy press statement, claiming the video was a regrettable snippet taken out of context during a private family intervention for Harper's declining mental health. They painted me as an unstable woman who had entrapped her husband and sister, orchestrating a scene to hide my own psychological breakdown. Ethan remained silent, letting his mother and the paid bots do the dirty work. He was hiding, hoping the noise would drown out the truth. I did not go on television to cry. I did not post a rant on social media. I issued a single 50-word statement through Miranda Cross. It simply clarified that the divorce petition had been filed 3 days prior to the dinner, citing adultery and financial misappropriation, and that I wished the happy couple privacy during this legal process. It was cold, it was professional, and it made their intervention story look exactly like the lie it was. At noon, my burner phone buzzed. It was Tessa. I let it ring twice before answering. You crazy witch," Tessa screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Do you have any idea what you have done? The reporters are outside my apartment. They are digging through my trash. You wanted to be famous." "Tessa," I replied, staring at the wall of my temporary rental apartment. "You wanted to be Mrs. Caldwell. This is part of the package." "Harper, please." "Stop this," she sobbed, the anger dissolving into terrified pleading. "You have to issue a retraction. You have to tell them we were just trying to help you. If they keep digging, if they find out about the other thing, I am dead. You know I can't handle this." I hung up. She wasn't scared of being called a homewrecker. She was scared of something else. My private investigator sent over the full report an hour later, and the picture became clear. Tessa was not just in debt, she was drowning. She owed over $100,000 to private lenders who were not the type to send polite letters. But the real bomb was in the public records of Clark County, Nevada. Tessa was still legally married to a mechanic named Gary. She had never filed for divorce. If she married Ethan, she would be committing a felony. She needed Ethan's money to pay off the lenders and buy her husband's silence. And I had just put a spotlight on her entire existence. Ethan tried to retaliate in the only language he knew control. I received a notification that my access to the main house had been revoked and my credit cards had been reported stolen. He thought he was locking me out in the cold. He did not know that I had spent the last 2 weeks moving my grandmother's china, my clothes, and my personal documents into a climate-controlled storage unit on the other side of the city. I was not locked out. I had already moved on. The real twist came at 4 in the afternoon. A junior accountant from the Caldwell Foundation, a quiet man who had always been kind to me, reached out via an encrypted messaging app. "Mrs. Caldwell," he wrote, "I shouldn't be telling you this, but I am scared. Patricia ordered an emergency transfer last night. She moved $2 million from the scholarship fund to an offshore account in the Caymans. She backdated the authorization to make it look like it happened last week, but the timestamp on the server shows it happened at 3 in the morning, right after the dinner ended." I forwarded the screenshot immediately to Miranda. She called me within 30 seconds. "They just violated the automatic temporary restraining order on assets," Miranda said, her voice buzzing with adrenaline. Moving marital or organizational assets after a freeze order is served is not just a violation. Harper, it is contempt of court. And because it involves charity funds, it is wire fraud. I walked to the window and looked out at the city below. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The Caldwells were not just fighting a divorce. They were not just trying to save face. They were liquidating. They were panic-moving money because they knew the audit I had triggered was coming. They aren't fighting to keep me, I whispered to the empty room. They are fighting to get away. The dinner had been a smokescreen. They wanted to discredit me not because they hated me, but because I was the only witness to the house of cards they had built. And now, by trying to destroy me, they had lit the match that would burn it all down. The air in the emergency hearing room was cold enough to preserve dead bodies, which felt appropriate given that the Caldwells were trying to bury me. Their lawyer was a man named Vance who wore a suit that cost more than my college tuition. He did not look at me as a person. He looked at me as a stain he was being paid to scrub out. "Your Honor," Vance boomed, his voice filling the small chamber. "Mrs. Caldwell has engaged in a systematic campaign of privacy invasion and harassment. We are requesting an immediate gag order and a countersuit for $10 million in damages for the reputational harm she has inflicted. She is unstable, vindictive, and, quite frankly, a danger to herself." It was a good performance. Ethan sat next to him, looking down at his hands, playing the part of the grieving husband forced to discipline a wild animal. But we were not there to perform. We were there to present facts. Miranda Cross stood up. She did not shout. She simply placed a small USB drive on the judge's bench. "Defense is projecting, Your Honor," Miranda said calmly. "We have audio evidence obtained under a pre-existing court order for domestic documentation. It proves that the plaintiff's mother, Patricia Caldwell, conspired to fabricate a mental health crisis for my client to bypass the prenuptial agreement. Furthermore, we have the plaintiff's own admission of adultery, broadcast by his own hand to thousands of viewers. The judge played the audio. Patricia's voice rang out, sharp and cruel, discussing the timeline for kicking me out. Then came the clip of Ethan admitting to his 6-month affair. The silence that followed was heavy. The judge looked over his glasses at Ethan. "Mr. Caldwell, the court is issuing a temporary restraining order on all assets. You are prohibited from selling, transferring, or encumbering any property. You are also enjoined from making any further public statements regarding your wife's mental health. If I find out you have moved so much as $1, I will hold you in contempt." It should have ended there, but arrogance is a hard habit to break. Less than 2 hours after the gavel fell, my phone alerted me to a flag on the joint accounts. Patricia had tried to wire $300,000 to a consulting firm in Delaware. The bank's fraud algorithm, triggered by the court order we had just uploaded, blocked the transaction immediately. They were not just desperate, they were reckless. Ethan's facade finally cracked. He cornered me in the hallway outside the courtroom, his eyes wide and frantic. "Harper, wait," he said, reaching for my arm before pulling back. We need to talk, privately, no lawyers, just us. I will meet you in the mediation room," I said, my voice flat, with the court reporter present. He agreed because he had no choice. We sat across a narrow table in the gray-walled room. Ethan loosened his tie. He looked like a man who had been running for days. "Just to sign the settlement." "Harper," he pleaded, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I will double the payout. I will give you 100,000. I need this closed today." "Why today?" "Ethan," I asked. "Why the rush?" He ran a hand through his hair, sweat beading on his forehead. "Because the merger. The Ravenwood deal. It is contingent on a clean audit. If this divorce drags out, if they look at the books, everything collapses. I need you to sign so I can close the deal and cover the holes before the regulators look too deep." He had said it. He had admitted that the divorce was a cover-up for financial fraud. The court reporter's fingers flew across her machine, capturing every word. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Tessa. She had not dared to show her face today. "If you expose my past, I swear I will take you down with me. I know things about you that you don't want out." I stared at the screen and smiled. She was threatening a witness during an active legal proceeding. It was just another nail in the coffin she had built for herself. I stood up, leaving the settlement papers untouched on the table. Ethan looked up, terrified. "Harper, please," he cried out. "What do you want?" I walked out of the room. Miranda met me in the corridor. She had heard everything through the open door. She looked at me, her expression serious. "We have them, Harper," Miranda said quietly. "We have enough to win the civil case. We have enough to get you a massive settlement. But with what he just admitted, this could go criminal. Do you want to stop here, or do you want to keep going? How much do you want them to pay?" I looked back at the closed door where my husband sat, sweating and terrified, calculating how to save his own skin while sacrificing everyone else. "I don't want money, Miranda," I replied. "I want to make sure they can never do this to anyone else again." The final hearing was a spectacle of desperate people trying to outrun their own shadows. I walked into the courtroom carrying a final supplementary file, the transaction logs of Patricia's attempt to move $2 million after the judge had frozen the assets. It was not just evidence of wealth, it was evidence of contempt. Patricia sat in the witness box, dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, playing the role of the fragile matriarch deceived by a scheming daughter-in-law. Ethan sat at the defense table, shrinking into his suit. He was already trying to pivot, painting himself as a passive son manipulated by his mother's domineering nature. It was pathetic to watch. Miranda Cross waited until they had finished their performances before she stood up. She played the recording from the mediation room. Ethan's voice filled the silent courtroom, clear and undeniable, admitting that he needed me to sign the settlement to hide the holes in the company ledger before an audit. The judge's face hardened. The air in the room grew thin, but I was not done. I signaled Miranda to play the final card. She approached the bench with a certified document from the state of Nevada. "Your Honor," Miranda said, "the defense claims that Miss Tessa Wells is the intended future spouse of the defendant and a stable partner. However, records show that Ms. Wells is currently married to a Mr. Gary Soloway. She has been married for 4 years. Any financial agreements or future trusts drafted by the Caldwell estate in her name are based on fraudulent pretenses." The reaction was immediate and visceral. Ethan stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He turned on Tessa, his face purple with rage. "You are married!" Ethan shouted, forgetting where he was. "You told me you were single. You signed the disclosure forms. I was going to fix it," Tessa stammered, shrinking away from him. "I needed the money to pay for the divorce." Patricia joined the fray, turning on Tessa with the ferocity of a cornered animal. "You trash! You lied to us. You infiltrated my home. You invited me in," Tessa screamed back. It was exactly what I had predicted. The alliance crumbled the moment the pressure became real. They were eating each other alive right in front of the judge. The gavel banged, cutting through the chaos. The judgment was swift and severe. The court granted the divorce on the grounds of adultery and cruelty. Crucially, because of the public live stream and the proven conspiracy to defamation, the judge ruled that the prenuptial agreement's asset cap was void. I was awarded a significant settlement, spousal support, and legal fees. A permanent restraining order was issued against Patricia, barring her from contacting me or speaking about me publicly. As the bailiff moved to dismiss the court, the doors at the back of the room opened. 4 men in dark suits walked in. They were not local police. They were federal agents from the Financial Crimes Division. Patricia's illegal transfer the night before had triggered an automatic flag in the banking system, alerting the authorities to the very fraud I had reported weeks ago. Ethan saw them and collapsed back into his chair. He looked at me, his eyes wide with terror. "Harper," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Harper, please, you can stop this. Tell them it was a mistake. Help me save the name." I gathered my files, stacking them neatly. I looked at the man who had announced his betrayal of me to the world over a dinner table. You chose to speak loudly at dinner. Ethan, I said, my voice steady and final. Now you have to listen. I walked out of the courtroom and into the bright afternoon sun. I signed the final paperwork in the clerk's office, tracing the letters of my name, Harper Wells. No Caldwell, no burden. Outside, the cameras were waiting, but this time, I did not hide. I walked past them, head high, leaving the chaos behind me. I did not use violence. I did not scream. I simply let the truth do its work, and I let them fall into the very hole they had dug for me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on how Harper handled her revenge. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Victoria Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people.